Anyone responsible for naming a child knows to check the meaning of a name first. In 384 BCE, a baby boy in Greece had a heck of a name to live up to, or perhaps all of those named after him had to live up to his reputation. The meanings behind his name range from the best purpose, to the best of all, to superior best of thinkers. Figured it out yet? It's Aristotle, who many consider to be the greatest philosopher of all time. And if you've taken any communication or philosophy classes, you've probably been exposed to at least his rhetorical proofs, Ethos, Pathos, and Logos. While Aristotle is known for his work in other areas, we'll focus on his contributions to public speaking, or what was termed rhetoric in his time. Aristotle defined rhetoric as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. We'll start with the discussion of what types of speeches you can evaluate using persuasive tools, then cover Aristotle's inartistic and artistic proofs, concluding with a brief discussion of his rhetorical triangle. Warning, by the end of this video, you may find yourself craving some sourdough bread, as I'm using it as a topic for a hypothetical speech to analyze. Notice that Aristotle focuses on persuasion in his definition of rhetoric, implying that there is persuasion and non-persuasion. The most common speech purposes are persuasive, informative, and entertaining, but there can be some overlap in those speeches. For example, if an informative speech isn't at least somewhat entertaining, people will tune it out. And if a persuasive speech omits information, it probably won't be successful. Many scholars argue that all communication is persuasive. It's just a matter of degree. By merely mentioning the topic of sourdough bread, I am, at the very least, persuading you that the topic is worth talking about or that I think it is interesting, even if I'm not overtly persuading you in some way. Look at this entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which says that the process of persuasion can be analyzed in a preliminary way by distinguishing communication, as the cause or stimulus, from the associated changes in attitudes, as the effect or response. My mention of sourdough bread would be the stimulus, or cause, of the effect or response. In this case, it might be that you, as my listener, may consider buying sourdough bread, order it at a restaurant, make it at home, or talk about it with a friend. If I told you that some studies claim that sourdough bread is the best bread for your gut health, your intestines, that piece of information alone may result in you considering including sourdough bread in your diet. Or I could relate some of the history of this tasty staple, like the first recorded sourdough bread bakers were Egyptians in about 1500 BCE, who accidentally discovered that dough left out created wild yeast spores, which caused it to rise. The Greeks and Romans picked up the practice in about 800 BCE. Just by relaying some of this information, I might pique your interest in a topic you might not have previously thought about. Again, persuading you at least that you might consider spending a little more time learning about this deliciously historical baked goodness. With this in mind, even a primarily informative speech on sourdough bread can be analyzed as a persuasive artifact. How? That leads us to the next part of Aristotle's contribution, persuasive proofs. Many people think that these proofs can only be applied to overtly persuasive speeches, but you can see these in informative and entertaining speeches too. So we're going to continue using an informative speech on sourdough bread to show how these proofs can be used in all types of speeches. And the word proof is intentional. Think about the different ways you can prove something. You point to or refer to a piece of paper, you demonstrate how an item works, you cite an expert, maybe you are the expert. These are a combination of what Aristotle called artistic and inartistic proofs. What's the difference? Inartistic proofs are things that exist. They are there, tangible. In the words of Aristotle, of all the modes of persuasion, some belong strictly to the art of rhetoric, and some do not. By the latter, that's the inartistic proofs, I mean such things that are not supplied by the speaker but are there at the outset. Witnesses, evidence given under torture, written contracts, etc. In the case of a speech on sourdough bread, you have the bread itself, the testimony of a friend, the nutrition label, recipes, the ingredients, the articles, books, and media coverage that you find, the statistics on how much yeast and flour purchases increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, and so on. By the former, Aristotle continued, that's the artistic proofs, I mean such as we ourselves construct by the means of the principles of rhetoric. The one kind merely has to be used, the other has to be invented. Aristotle viewed rhetoric as an art, which brings us to the artistic proofs. Just as an artist, let's use a baker, searches out the right ingredients, tools, and bakeware and avoids the ones that aren't quite right, then uses creativity and skill to create a masterpiece, the rhetorician selects and uses those inartistic proofs we just talked about in the creation of artistic proofs, of which Aristotle distilled down to three: ethos, pathos, and logos. The rhetorical triangle. There really is a great deal to cover here, so we'll gloss over lots of it. Trust me, if you study communication or philosophy, you'll get more instruction in these three proofs. The first proof depends on the personal character of the speaker. Ethos. Ethos is not, as some assume, ethics, although the speaker's ethics can definitely play a role. The closest translation is source credibility. Do you trust the source that they are not using persuasion to manipulate? Does the source have integrity and the knowledge or expertise needed for you to trust what they say? In other words, the source is the proof. Would it make a difference to you if Martha Stewart were the one giving a speech on sourdough bread? You've probably at least heard of her, a media personality known for, among other things, being a really good cook and baker. According to the British international market research firm YouGov, almost half of her audience probably likes her and would trust her on this topic. However, if YouGov's data is correct, about 1 in 5 would not be impressed, and potentially even dismiss what she has to say. That brings up what I feel is the most important point, maybe even eye-opening. To paraphrase a cliche, a speaker's ethos is fully in the eye of the beholder. We, the audience, grant or deny the speaker ethos, and it may be dependent on the topic or situation. Despite all of Martha Stewart's shortcomings, I know who she is and trust her on the topic of baking, so for me, she wouldn't need to establish her credibility on this topic. But I might not grant her the same ethos on, for example, the topic of eye disease. The second artistic proof, pathos, is what Aristotle defined as putting the audience into a certain frame of mind. This is the appeal to emotions. Yes, it would be simpler if it were called emotos, but it's easy to remember if you connect the concept to words like empathy and sympathy. It's not always an appeal to those emotions, however. Nostalgia, patriotism, humor, these are emotions too. If I were to talk about homemade bread, many of you would think back to times in the kitchen when you may have baked with a parent, a simpler time. Or others might think of a trip to San Francisco, Italy, Germany, or wherever they first sampled a crusty slice of sourdough bread. Whatever, it's an emotional response. When you use language, stories, or examples that appeal to the emotions, you are using pathos. And of course, marketers have known for years that the aroma of freshly baked bread evokes an emotional response. The third artistic proof is logos, the use of evidence and reasoning. Evidence itself is one of the inartistic proofs, but which evidence you incorporate and how you use it is logos. Reasoning is about how you apply logic. Aristotle goes into detail on syllogisms and enthymemes. You'll likely learn about those too in your studies of logic, but you've probably had someone explain something to you that just makes sense, with or without evidence. Did you know, for example, that according to TasteWise's 2023 report on sourdough bread consumption trends, analysis, and statistics, sourdough bread is available at about 10% of restaurants. If you go out to eat, there's a 1 in 10 chance that sourdough bread is on the menu. In this example, I'm supporting my conclusion that you likely have access to sourdough bread by explaining my reasoning process. I'm even using evidence to make my argument stronger. So, what did we learn from this? That persuasion exists to some degree in all forms of communication, even those that are not overtly persuasive. With that in mind, we can see how communicators use Aristotle's proofs, both inartistic and artistic, which helps us in not only analyzing others' communication, but also how to work those same proofs into our communication. One final thought. When you see the visual representation of the rhetorical triangle, it's usually displayed as an equilateral triangle, implying that each proof should be used equally or is equally important. However, depending on the topic, occasion, and the source, that may not necessarily be the case. Some persuasive speeches may require a stronger emphasis on logos than pathos. An expert with strong ethos may not need to use as much logos in their presentation as someone we don't know. If the head baker of Boudin, the well-known bread-making company in San Francisco, were to give a speech on sourdough bread, they wouldn't need to devote much time in their presentation to logos because their reputation and profession would likely be enough. They probably won't need to cite evidence, although they might explain the logic of how the bread proofing process works. Regardless, knowing more about the rhetorical triangle will benefit you in your critical thinking process as both a consumer and speaker of rhetoric. Now, if you'll excuse me, all this talk about sourdough bread has stimulated my appetite. Perhaps yours too?